They fear what they can't control. And you just became uncontrollable. You've been told your whole life that being different is the problem, that standing out makes you a target, that the safest path is the one where you blend in, comply, and never challenge the script. But here's what they don't tell you. The herd doesn't fear the wolf because it's loud. It fears the wolf because it operates outside their rules. And the moment you stop trying to fit in, the moment you stop chasing their approval, you become something far more dangerous than an outcast. You become unpredictable. You become uncontrollable. And that's when the real power begins. Machiavelli understood it. The black sheep lives it. The one who refuses to bow, who walks alone, who shapes consequence instead of begging for inclusion. That's the one they whisper about. That's the one they can't ignore. Because fear isn't born from violence. It's born from uncertainty. And when you stop playing by their psychology, when you stop giving them access to your weakness, you shatter the only weapon they had: control. This isn't about being cruel. This is about being sovereign. And sovereignty, that's what they fear most. So, let me ask you this. Are you still performing for their approval? Or are you ready to step into the cold truth that respect doesn't come from warmth? It comes from the understanding that you can't be touched. You walk into a room and people shift. Not because you're loud, because you're unreadable. They can't predict your next move, and that terrifies them. The world operates on scripts. Smile when they smile, agree when they agree, bend when they push. But you don't. And the moment you refuse to play their game, you become dangerous. Fear isn't born from violence. It's born from uncertainty. When people can't control you, they lose power over you. That's why they call you cold. That's why they whisper behind your back. I learned this in a boardroom once. I stayed silent while others fought for approval, eager to prove themselves. They looked at me like I was hiding something. I wasn't. I was just refusing to perform. And that silence, that refusal to give them anything to manipulate, made me the most powerful person in the room. They feared what they couldn't decode. You don't need to dominate through force. You dominate through unpredictability. When they can't map your weakness, they can't exploit it. And when they can't exploit it, they fear you. Every label they give you, arrogant, distant, ruthless, is a confession of their own weakness. They need you to be soft, so they can feel strong. They need you to seek approval so they can withhold it. But when you stop caring about their validation, you shatter their only weapon. Psychology teaches us that humans fear the unknown more than the known threat. A predator they can see is less terrifying than a shadow they can't predict. You are that shadow now, and shadows don't apologize for existing. Control isn't about forcing others to obey. It's about making them afraid to test you. When you operate outside their expectations, you dismantle their sense of dominance. They lose the script. They lose the boundary. And without a boundary to push, they lose their sense of power over you. This is why fairness doesn't exist in human hierarchies. People respect what they fear, not what they pity. The moment you become predictable, you become controllable. The moment you become controllable, you lose. But here's the part they'll never tell you. Their fear is your confirmation. When they can't manipulate you with guilt, shame, or emotion, they resort to labels. Those labels aren't insults, they're admissions of defeat. You've slipped through their psychology, their manipulation tactics, their need for consequence. And now they're scrambling to regain control by making you doubt yourself. Don't. Their fear is proof you're doing it right. And once you understand that fear is respect in disguise, You'll stop trying to be liked, because respect doesn't come from warmth. It comes from the cold understanding that you can't be touched. You were cast out because you refused to bow. They wanted compliance and you gave them indifference. That's when you became the black sheep, the one who doesn't fit, doesn't beg, doesn't break. And here's what they'll never admit. The black sheep sees clearer than the herd. While everyone else chases inclusion, you stopped chasing anything. You started shaping. The herd operates on approval. You operate on consequence. They move in predictable patterns because they need safety in numbers. You move alone because survival doesn't require permission. The ascension begins the moment you stop trying to belong. I've watched people destroy themselves trying to fit into circles that were designed to reject them. They twist their personality, dull their edges, apologize for existing. And for what? A seat at a table where they're barely tolerated. The black sheep doesn't sit at that table. It builds its own. When you stop chasing inclusion, you unlock something most people never touch: autonomy. You no longer need their validation to move. You no longer need their respect to act. And that autonomy, that's power in its purest form. To be feared is to be free. People think fear and respect are opposites. They're not. Fear is respect without the comfort of control. When someone fears you, they can't predict you. They can't box you in. They can't manipulate your emotions or exploit your weakness. Fear means they've lost the ability to dominate you psychologically. And once that happens, you're untouchable. The black sheep doesn't ask for fairness. It creates imbalance in its favor. It doesn't seek approval. It commands attention through unpredictability. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. The prince who is loved can be betrayed. The prince who is feared cannot. Love requires reciprocity. Fear only requires presence. When you stop performing for others, when you stop softening your edges to make them comfortable, you step into a different psychology. You become the variable they can't calculate. And humans hate variables. They hate what they can't categorize, control, or predict. That hatred, that's your confirmation. That's the signal you've ascended beyond their reach. They fear what they can't control. And that's your power. Not because you're cruel, because you're sovereign. You don't need their permission to exist. You don't need their validation to act. You've exited the herd's emotional economy, and now you operate on your own terms. The black sheep doesn't argue its worth. It demonstrates dominance through detachment, and detachment, when wielded correctly, is the highest form of psychological warfare. You're no longer playing their game. You're playing a different one entirely, one they don't even know exists. You were rejected, cast out, left behind, and you thought it was punishment, but it was preparation. The herd exiles those it can't control, and in doing so, it creates its own predator. While they stayed comfortable inside their boundaries, you learned to survive outside them. Rejection strips illusion faster than any lesson. It shows you who people really are when you're no longer useful. It teaches you that loyalty is conditional, that fairness is a lie, and that the only person you can rely on is yourself. The exile doesn't mourn what it lost. It sharpens what remains. Solitude isn't loneliness, it's clarity. When you're alone, the noise stops. No one's validation to chase, no one's opinion to manage, no one's emotion to absorb. You start seeing patterns you couldn't see before. You notice how people manipulate through guilt, how they use approval as a leash, how they exploit weakness by pretending it's empathy. I spent years thinking connection meant belonging. It doesn't. Connection is a tool, and most people wield it like a weapon, not a gift. The exile learns this early, and once you learn it, You can't unsee it. While the herd chases inclusion, the outcast learns observation. You watch how power moves, how dominance is established, how respect is earned, not through kindness but through consequence. You see who controls the room and why. You notice the silent players, the ones who don't speak but always win. You study psychology not from books but from behavior. And that education, that's worth more than any acceptance they could have given you. The exile becomes the strategist, the observer, the one who sees the game while others are still playing it blind. Isolation isn't punishment, it's preparation for command. Every great leader, every feared figure, every person who reshaped the world, they all walked through exile first. Marcus Aurelius wrote his meditations in isolation. Machiavelli penned The Prince in Exile. Sun Tzu observed warfare from the margins before he taught it. Exile forces you to rely on your mind, not your surroundings. It teaches you self-control when no one's watching. It builds ruthlessness when survival depends on it. You don't come out of exile weak. You come out weaponized. The advantage isn't obvious until you return. When you step back into the world, you're different. You don't react the same. You don't fear rejection because you've already survived it. You don't chase approval because you've learned to live without it. You don't seek validation because you've built your own internal power structure. The herd still operates on emotion, you operate on strategy. They're still performing, you're calculating. And that gap? That's dominance. That's the exile's advantage. You were cast out, but you didn't break. You evolved. And now they're looking at someone they can no longer control. You don't survive exile by staying soft. You survive by turning every wound into armor. The black sheep doesn't forget what broke it. It studies it. Every betrayal becomes a lesson in trust. Every rejection becomes a boundary. Every moment of pain gets cataloged, analyzed, and weaponized. This isn't bitterness. This is evolution. The herd mistakes your coldness for cruelty, but it's not cruelty. It's survival psychology. You learned that weakness invites predators, so you stopped showing weakness. You stopped giving people ammunition. You became untouchable not by avoiding pain, but by refusing to let it control you. Those who live outside the herd grow their own laws. You don't follow their rules anymore because their rules were designed to keep you small. Fairness, politeness, humility, these are tools of control. They tell you to stay humble so you don't threaten their dominance. They tell you to be kind so you're easier to exploit. But you've seen through it. You've built your own code now, your own boundaries, your own sense of justice. And it's not based on what they taught you. It's based on what works. The black sheep doesn't seek permission to enforce its laws. It enforces them through presence, through consequence, through the quiet understanding that crossing you isn't worth the risk. Every scar becomes a lesson in control. I've watched people break under pressure because they never processed their pain. They buried it, ignored it, pretended it didn't shape them. But the black sheep does the opposite. It dissects every failure, every moment of manipulation, every time someone used emotion as a weapon, and it learns. Pain isn't something you run from, it's something you study. It teaches you where your boundaries were too weak, where your psychology was too exposed, where you gave people too much power over you. And once you learn those lessons, you don't repeat them. You fortify, you adapt. You become harder to break. Pain no longer defines you, it sharpens you. The difference between the weak and the feared isn't that one feels pain and the other doesn't. It's that the weak let pain dictate their actions, while the feared use pain to refine their strategy. You don't react emotionally anymore. You calculate. You don't seek revenge. You eliminate the conditions that allowed betrayal in the first place. You don't forgive easily. You simply stop giving people access. This is ruthlessness in its truest form. Not cruelty for cruelty's sake, but the surgical removal of anything that weakens you. The black sheep doesn't seek safety in others. It becomes its own fortress. The black sheep doesn't seek safety. It becomes the storm. You stop running from conflict and start embodying it. Not through aggression, but through presence. People feel the shift when you walk in. They sense you're no longer asking for anything. You're not hoping for approval. You're not looking for validation. You're simply there, immovable, unshakable, unpredictable, and that presence is more powerful than any argument. It's dominance without declaration, control without force, fear without threat. You've weaponized your psychology to the point where your silence carries more weight than most people's words. And when silence becomes your armor, no one dares test what lies beneath it. You don't need to raise your voice to command a room. The black sheep learned this long ago. Silence is the most violent form of power. While others argue, explain, and defend themselves, you simply observe. You watch how they reveal their insecurities through their words, how they expose their manipulation tactics through their emotion, how they beg for control by trying to provoke a reaction, and you give them nothing. That absence, that refusal to engage, is what breaks them. They can't manipulate what they can't reach. They can't dominate what won't respond. And that's when fear sets in. The black sheep doesn't argue because it has nothing to prove. Arguments are for people who need validation. Debates are for those who still care about being right. But when you've ascended beyond approval, you stop wasting energy on performance. You stop explaining yourself. You stop justifying your decisions. You simply act and let the consequence speak for itself. I've sat in rooms where people screamed, debated, and politicked for hours. I said nothing, and by the end, they all looked to me. Not because I was loud, but because I was the only one who didn't need their agreement. Silence is rebellion refined into dominance. Its rebellion is quiet, its control invisible. People expect resistance to be loud. They expect defiance to announce itself. But the most dangerous form of rebellion is the one they can't see. It's the refusal to play their game while they're still convinced you're playing. It's the psychological detachment that makes you immune to their manipulation. You're not fighting their system. You're operating outside it entirely. And that invisibility, that's what makes you unpredictable. They can't prepare for what they can't anticipate. They can't defend against what they can't detect. You've become the variable in their equation they can never solve. People fear you because they can't predict when you'll strike. And here's the secret. You don't have to strike at all. The threat is enough. The possibility is enough. When people know you're capable of consequence but don't know when or how you'll deliver it, they police themselves. They avoid crossing you. They think twice before testing your boundaries. This is power in its purest form. Dominance through uncertainty. You're not reactive. You're not emotional. You're just there, watching, calculating, waiting. And that patience, that's what separates fear from respect. Anyone can react. Only the disciplined can wait. Only the strategic can make others afraid of their own imagination. Silence is rebellion refined into dominance. You've stopped explaining your moves because explanation is weakness. You've stopped defending your choices because defense implies doubt. You've stopped engaging with their provocations because engagement is validation. And in that silence, you've built something they can never touch. Autonomy. You operate on your terms now. You enforce your own psychology. You create consequence without announcement. The black sheep doesn't roar to prove its strength. It simply exists. And existence alone is enough to shift the room. When people fear what you might do more than what you've done, you've mastered control. And control without force is the highest form of power. You were never meant to fit. The moment you tried, you lost. But the moment you stopped, you became something they couldn't ignore. The black sheep is the outcast who sees through illusion, the one who realized inclusion was a cage, not a reward. You watched people bend themselves into shapes they didn't recognize, all for a seat at a table that would never truly accept them. You watched them perform, apologize, shrink, and somewhere in that observation, you made a choice. You stopped chasing. You started shaping. You stopped begging for respect and started creating consequence. That's when everything shifted. They stop chasing inclusion and start shaping consequence. The herd moves together because it fears being alone. But you've learned that solitude isn't weakness, it's sovereignty. You don't need their validation to act. You don't need their approval to decide. You've built your own power structure, and it doesn't require their participation. This is the ascension, the moment you realize you were never the problem. Their system was. Their rules were designed to keep you compliant, not powerful. But you've exited that system entirely. Now you operate on a different frequency, one they can sense but can't decode, one they fear but can't control. To be feared is to be free. People think freedom comes from being liked, from being accepted, from being safe. It doesn't. Freedom comes when people are afraid to test you, when they know that crossing your boundary carries consequence, not conversation, when they understand that your silence isn't submission, it's calculation. Fear creates distance, and distance creates autonomy. You're no longer entangled in their emotional games. You're no longer reactive to their manipulation. You've stepped outside their psychology entirely, and now they're forced to respect you, not because they want to, but because they have no other choice. Fear means unpredictability, and unpredictability is the ultimate form of dominance. When people can't map your reactions, they can't exploit your weakness. When they can't predict your next move, they can't prepare a defense. You've become the unknown variable in every equation, the piece they can't control, the threat they can't neutralize. This is why Machiavelli wrote that it's better to be feared than loved. Love requires trust, and trust can be broken. But fear requires only presence. Only the understanding that you operate beyond their reach, that you enforce your own laws, that you answer to no one but yourself. They fear what they can't control, and that's your power. Not because you're violent, not because you're cruel, but because you're sovereign. You've reclaimed your psychology, you've fortified your boundaries, you've built armor from every wound they inflicted. And now, when they look at you, they don't see the person who wanted to belong. They see the person who stopped needing them entirely. That shift, that transformation from approval seeker to autonomous force, is the black sheep ascension. You don't control through force. You control through presence. You don't dominate through aggression. You dominate through the quiet, undeniable reality that you can no longer be touched. You weren't cast out because you were broken. You were cast out because you couldn't be controlled. And now you understand what they've been hiding from you all along. Fear is respect without the illusion of warmth. You don't need their approval. You don't need their inclusion. You need only one thing: the cold understanding that you operate beyond their reach. The black sheep doesn't apologize for existing. It enforces consequence through presence. It dominates through silence. It ascends by refusing to descend. They will always fear what they can't predict. Let them. Their fear is your confirmation. Their discomfort is your power. You've exited their system, and now you're building your own. One where you don't ask for respect, you command it. One where you don't seek control, you embody it. This is the ascension. This is the truth Machiavelli carved into history and most will never touch. You're no longer the person who wanted to belong. You're the person who stopped needing anything from anyone. But here's what you need to understand. If you don't control the narrative, someone else will, and they'll use it to erase you. I've already broken this down in brutal detail. Watch Control the Narrative, or Be Erased from It next. Not because I'm asking, because you need to see how they've been writing your story without your permission. How they've been shaping your identity through manipulation you didn't even notice. You've ascended as the black sheep. Now learn how to protect that ascension, how to dominate the narrative before it dominates you. Write this in the comments. I control the frame. No explanation, no hesitation, just the declaration. The black sheep doesn't explain itself. It simply exists, and existence alone is domination.